Hello, my name is Jean-Pierre Després. I am the chair of the Council of Lifestyle and Cardiometabolic Health, and I'm here with Dr. Elizabeth Selvin from Johns Hopkins University and Dr. Alvaro Alonso from Emory University to discuss a hot off the press session which was held today, and we had actually very interesting talks this morning, and thank you for joining me today. First one was a paper by Paul Monter from University of Alabama in Birmingham on the dealing with the impact of the new ACC/AHA guidelines in terms of dealing with the prevalence and management of hypertension. So what were your reaction to this very interesting talk?
Yeah, this was a fantastic talk, and I think one of the questions that always arises after the publication of guidelines is, well, what is the impact? What does this mean for the population? And so this paper really directly addressed that question and addressed sort of issues related to the increase in adults eligible for pharmacologic therapy, which was quite small, 1.9%, and talked about the percent eligible for intensification, and really helped us get an understanding of the impact of this guideline change.
The second talk was given by Dr. Mike Banks from Northwestern University in Chicago, and that also dealt with a very important issue, the race disparity in terms of diabetes risk. Alvaro, would you comment on this one?
Yeah, happy to. I think that the important take-home message from this paper was the importance that biological factors, including obesity and other cardiovascular risk factors, really have in explaining these racial disparities. And those results really highlight the value of focusing on the determinants, both proximal and distal, of these risk factors if we really want to prevent diabetes, and also, more importantly, I think, eliminate disparities in the incidence, racial disparities in this country.
I thought this paper really moves the literature forward in a meaningful way. Dr. Banks even mentioned Dr. Fred Brancati's landmark paper, which was published in 2000, establishing major racial disparities in diabetes risk. And we know from some other literature that there are racial differences in BMI trajectories and weight trajectories, and he sort of brought it all together and showed that these differences from young adulthood to midlife in weight gain really have a major impact of diabetes risk. I think really important paper, high impact, really wonderful presentation.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think it will provide us with loci for effective intervention to deal with these disparities. Another fascinating talk I thought was the one by Dr. Tiffany Powell-Wiley from the NIH, where she used a very interesting model of simulating the impact of crime on physical activity and on obesity.
Yeah, this one was very provocative and a very understudied topic from an epidemiologic perspective. So I really appreciated the contribution of this paper. One thing, sort of an extension that occurred to me while I was listening to her talk, is also sedentary behavior, right? In the literature, there's been this distinction between physical activity and sedentary behavior, and certainly the link between crime and increases in sedentary behavior and impact on obesity would be relevant as well.
Yeah, I think definitely, I agree. What I really liked about this particular paper was the method that was used. The approach was used an agent-based modeling method to really understand what the impact of crime was on physical activity in these women. And I believe that this is an area, a particular method that is not really frequently used in epidemiologic research. And I think I see that it has a lot of potential to really understand what the impact of potential interventions can have in groups of people, because it really takes into account interactions over time and between people that occur when you intervene in a population. So definitely that's something that I thought that was a strength too.
So I guess we'll see more and more of that type of study in the future. Another talk was given by Dr. Fuchs. I hope I'm not mispronouncing too much her name and it was a trial conducted to look at the effect of low-dose diuretics in the pre-hypertensive category. And I guess there we learned that we have a long way to go to properly deal with that patient population.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me. I mean, sort of thinking back to the guidelines and Dr. Muntner's paper, it was also interesting to me that the PI investigators also discussed that they think lower is better, even sort of beyond the recommendations and direct implications of their own research. And so that was very striking to me in all of the hypertension presentations that we've seen.
I totally agree, and I think that the only point I would like to raise is that something that Dr. Fuchs would raise in the talk is that, first of all these patients, before being randomized to pharmacological treatment or placebo, all of them receive lifestyle counseling, and I think that this is something, no matter whether we eventually decide to treat pharmacologically, as the new guidelines remind us that the first step in the treatment and management of these patients should be lifestyle changes and lifestyle modification.
And your last point reminds me, and this is obviously a topic of interest to me, that we have a long way to go to developing proper tools, to target lifestyle the way we target traditional CVD risk factors. Now, the last talk of the session, and not the least, was the presentation given by Dr. Chris Gardner from Stanford University, where he looked at, through a very large randomized trial, at the impact of a healthy low-fat versus low-carb diet on weight loss, and essentially didn't find any difference between the two healthy diets. I think it was fascinating.
Yes, most exciting null trial that I have seen in a while. Very fun presentation. Really enjoyed listening to Dr. Gardner talk. I think one of the key things is it really confirms what we know from the weight loss literature, that it's really about persistence and adherence, and whether you can stick to a dietary change, to a dietary pattern, to a particular diet, and that is really what determines the achieved weight loss.
Yeah, thanks. So in addition to that, I think the important to remind the underlying hypothesis for this trial was that there will be some individual level factors that will be responsible for weight loss response, and I think that that's probably true. It's just that they were not probably looking at the right ones, and definitely that's something that offers opportunities for future research and really understand in what the right diet for different people will be, and why people respond better to some diets than others.
And if I may add in closing also, I guess those findings are consistent with many recommendations coming out all over the world, showing that if you eat the right food, actually, you don't have to worry too much about the fat content or the carbohydrate content of the diet. If you wipe out the refined sugar, the refined carbs, and eat food with good quality fat, you don't need to worry too much about the macronutrient composition of the diet. Well, in closing, I'd like to thank you for chairing what was a fascinating session this morning. And for those of you who are interested, you can, by this session, you can go on the website and you will have access to the titles and the link to have access to the full papers. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you.